but because it's all over Colourwork, a little bit of ease might not hurt. It is a toe-up sock, so we start with a closed cast on, but all of these techniques are looked at in detail for the rest of the video. If you want to knit along with me, you will need the sock yarn in 2 different colors. Hello, my name is Jeanette. I am the designer behind Jeanette Knits, and welcome to a special video on a pattern of mine that's coming out very shortly. And this time I am combining a quick overview of the pattern that you usually do, called a pattern deep dive, as well as a very in-depth tutorial going through every technique that's involved in making this pair of socks called a VKL Memories Socks. So in this video, I'll talk a little bit about the inspiration, the sizing, the gauge and yarn and needles, as well as all the techniques that are used and construction, of course, and then jump into a detailed demo of everything that you need to know to make a sock like this. This is the 9th edition to the Memory Sock collection, and it's a tribute to our visit to the Vogue Knitting Live event in New York at the start of this year. And I really felt that we were like in a knitter's palace with many floors, with all sorts of treats for us on every floor. So I wanted a pattern that's sophisticated and fancy, but nothing traditional. The gauge is 32 stitches times 38 rows in a 10 by 10 centimeter or 4 by 4 inch square that's worked in the round after blocking. And to achieve that gauge, I had to use 2.25 millimeter, that's US size 1 needles. The yarn was partly sponsored by a yarn shop called Gusset Yarns. They are from Canada, and the main color is from Patrick Knits. I believe this is their VKL exclusive colorway. And the contrast color is from Louise Robert Designs in colorway Sesame. I hope I'm pronouncing all those things correctly. I might need to have done it in a French way, but apologies in advance. I wasn't sure I was going to make a Colourwork sock at the time, and I thought that I might go for a lace pattern because lace was one of the workshops that I attended, and I thought I would be using some of the skills I learned there. But upon arriving home, putting these two together, I got this subtle contrast that just makes a really gentle looking sock. So if you want a gentle looking sock, go for a subtle contrast. If you want to make a bold statement, then go for a high contrast, and it will produce a striking result. Regarding the sizing, the sock comes in 3 sizes, and the size is determined by the foot circumference. So there's three possibilities there. The smallest one being 17.5 centimeters, that's 7 inches, and the largest is 22.5 centimeters, that's 9 inches. Because the length of the foot and the leg is adjustable easily. It's designed to be worn with 0 positive ease, but because it's all over Colourwork, a little bit of ease might not hurt, to make sure you can get your heel through the leg part too. So the construction, it is a toe-up sock. So we start with a closed cast on. I've picked the Judy's Magic cast on, as you'll see later, but you can also use your preferred method that produces the same results, such as the Turkish cast on. And then we do a few increases here to get to the full circumference of the foot. I'm using lifted increases, but any increase method can be substituted as long as you maintain the orientation. And then we attach contrast color and begin the Colourwork chart. Note that we will also move the beginning of round to the bottom of the sole, and we will have to be careful at looking at the chart and making sure we start at the correct place of the repeat. For each size it's different because we want the top of the foot to align with the first ornament. That's the first element in the chart. So to make sure that for all sizes it aligns there, we have to start and end with a different pattern with a different stitch of the pattern repeat, and that's all specified in the pattern. And once we are happy with the length of the instep, we start a sole gusset that's worked in Colourwork still. We continue the chart throughout the rest of the foot, but we're inserting this triangle here with, again, a lift and increases, and working that in a stripy pattern. And after we've done all the gusset increases, we add a little half moon shape here at the bottom of the heel to make a nice rounded heel. And I'm using Japanese short rows, but any short row method can be substituted. Then we move on to working a slip stitch heel that's back and forth. And finally, we get, well, not finally, there's a little bit left to go. We return to working back in the round and continue the same instruction as we did for the instep, but there are a little bit more stitches here in the leg than there were at the foot to get, because it is color work, so that will help getting the foot through. And finally, we finish with a 1x1 twisted rib and a very stretchy tubular bind-off. Well, stretchy if you keep it loose enough. But all of these techniques are looked at in detail for the rest of the video. So if you want to knit along with me, you'll need the sock yarn in 2 different colors. You'll also need the pattern that you can download as soon as it's published in a few days from Ravelry or from our website, and you should have done a gauge swatch to match the gauge and adjusted the needle size as necessary. If you're watching this before the pattern's out and you're not a newsletter subscriber yet, then you can become one by following the link in the description, and on the day of the release you'll get your exclusive subscriber discount. As this is a toe-up sock, it requires a closed cast on. There are a few options, and I have picked the Judy's Magic cast on, and for that you will need circular needles with quite a long cable. And we begin by first setting aside some tail. We only need to cast on 12 stitches on each needle, so we'll need to make 12 loops. This should do it. And then we need to make a slip knot and put it on one of the needles. And then we place the needles next to each other like so. And we hold the yarn like we would for a long tail cast on. So one strand goes over the index finger and the other one over the thumb. And then we've made a 1 loop on the top needle, and we need to swap. So 1 on the top, 1 on the bottom, 1 on the top, until we get 12 on each, 24 in total. And to get a loop on a needle, we have to remember a mantra that goes like opposite finger, opposite to the needle, under, around, and over, and finish through the center like so. And now I need a loop on the top needle, so I will go under, over, and through the middle. Opposite finger under, over, through the middle. Opposite finger under, over, through the middle. And once you get the hang of it, you can get quite quick, but you just have to also pull the yarn quite tight, because it's not very stable cast on, and whenever you get distracted you can easily determine which loop you need to make next. So here I finished with the top, next one is the bottom, so I'll take my top finger, go under and over through the middle. Just check how much I've got. So I've got 7, and now I need 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I'll just double check. 1, 2, 3. No, I'm still missing one. And now I have 24 in total, 12 on each needles. And here is where I have to twist the strands twice, because there's nothing else that's holding them in place. I have to also hold on to them while I adjust the needles to start work. And because the working yarn is on this side, I'll be working across what used to be the bottom needle. So I'll turn the work while holding the strands to the needles. I don't want to let go because everything will come apart. And I want to make sure that I select to work with the strand that's attached to the yarn ball or yarn skein or cake. And I will pull out the needle at the bottom that is now and leave these stitches on the cable. And this is why you need a circular needle, because you need this part to be flexible in order to be able to work across these stitches. And it needs to be quite long, so you can do this figure of 8 here. And we simply knit across these stitches. The first one is a bit tricky because it's not very stable. So you're using some of your fingers to keep things in place. It feels a little unusual, but that's okay. That's all normal. And when I get to the end of the first needle, I will again turn the work around. And now I need to transfer those stitches that were on the cable on the other needle. And this time pull this needle out and leave the already worked stitches on the cable. And here we have our slip knot, which is a little tricky to get into, but doable. And then the rest of the stitches just happen to be mounted the other way than we're used to. Well, if you knit combination knitting or Eastern knitting, then you'll be happy. This is the way your stitches are usually mounted, but for us continental or English style, we'll have to knit through the back loop. And it's also a lot easier to do it through the back loop on this needle. So intuitively, you should be able to see that on this needle we need to knit the rest of the stitches through the back loop to get them, instead of being twisted, but to lay nicely as in a stockinette stitch. And here I have my stitches cast on and the first row worked. I'll be continuing in the round on these circular needles. This is also the beginning of round where this tail keeps hanging, which is why I won't just place a marker just yet. I'll just recognize that this is the beginning of round because I've got my strand here, but we'll be working the toe increases on both needles. To work the toe increases, because this is a very symmetrical trapezoid shape, we will repeat the same instructions on each needle. So once on this side and then repeat the same on the other side. And we'll alternate between an increase round and a plain round until we reach the desired stitches. And the increase round just adds a couple of stitches here near the ends of each needle. So one between the first and second stitch and one between the last and one before last. And you can use whichever increase method you like. I really like the lifted increase, so I'll demo that. But as long as you keep the directions opposite, so in this case the first increase is right leaning and the second one is left leaning. You can use make one right and make one left instead as well, if lifted increases are not something that you enjoy doing. But I knit the first stitch, and to do a lifted right leaning increase, I need to pick up the stitch from just below. That is on the left hand needle for me, or the passive needle, and theoretically I need to place it on the needle like so and knit through the front loop, and I've got this extra stitch. But much easier I find is if I just turn work a little slightly so I can see the purl bump and insert my needle into that from top to bottom, so to speak, and then just wrap the yarn around and pull through. It's also doable in English style, so I put the needle through here and wrap the yarn like so. I'm not very fluent in English and everything falls apart for me, but I hope you see what I mean. So we need to just insert it here and pull the yarn through, and we've got our stitch. If you're struggling with that, then continue to pick it up from back to front, placing it on the needle. Make sure that you hold the first stitch back with your thumb so that they don't overlap, otherwise it's really tricky to insert the needle knitwise. So that's the right leaning lifted increase, and when I get to the other side I'll be working a left leaning lifted increase. Just one stitch before the end of the needle, and the left leaning lifted increase, we pick up a stitch from the other side, so from the right needle for me, and we insert again from back to front. This time it won't overlap anything because that existing stitch is already on the other needle, and we can simply knit through the back loop like so. And we knit the last stitch, and that's our increase instruction on one of the needles done. We repeat exactly the same on the second needle, then we do a plain round and again an increase round, etc., until we've got our toe completed. Now that I've finished my toe increases, I am almost ready to start the instep, except there's one more round that we do simply for moving the beginning of round from here on the side to all the way to the bottom of the sole. And we do that because the Colourwork pattern will be all around. There will be a natural break here in the middle of the sole going through the entire foot, and it will align perfectly here at the to be symmetrical here at the top of the foot, and for that reason it's simpler to have the beginning of round here in the sole, and then it will also be simpler to incorporate the gusset increases, etc. So I will also use this round to move to DPNs, because I prefer to work small circumferences on DPNs to save some time from sliding the stitches across the cables too much. So, but you can continue on circulars if that's your preference. So I will need to do, I'm doing size 2, so that means I need to get 16 stitches on each needle. So I've done 3 of the 4 DPNs, and that is where the beginning of round will be. It should be exactly in the middle of the sole, and this is also where I'll place my beginning of round marker. Because I'm working on DPNs, I can't place a marker here at the end of the needle. It would just keep falling off, so I'll place a marker here in the work to indicate that that is my beginning of round, and I can just keep it here and always look down, or I can keep moving it up as I knit and the sock grows longer. I've got one more DPN to do, but I will do that on the next round. Now, to set up the color work for the instep, we will have to always start the round with knitting one in main color. And we'll also knit the last stitch in main color, so that means there will be this line in main color throughout the whole foot, and that will act as the break in the stitch pattern, because the pattern repeat is 13 stitches and it's the same repeat for all sizes. So to make sure that the part of the chart that we want to be on the top is the first 6 stitches, and to make sure that that aligns here with the center of the top of the foot, each size has to start with a different starting stitch of the repeat, and the chart contains starting lines that are indicated, and for my size the starting stitch is 12th, so I need to do they also happen to be main color, so I need to do 2 stitches in main color, and that's when I first join the contrast color, and I like to do it with the help of a slip knot to just secure the yarn in place. Put it on the right hand needle here, and I'll work my 6 stitches of contrast color as per the chart for my size, and continue repeating the chart throughout all the way to 1 stitch before the end of the row or round, and I'll knit one with the main color again, and it should be symmetrically looking. It won't end with a full repeat, as it doesn't start with a full repeat. And to get that symmetry, it will just end where it needs to end, but it should all work out looking very symmetrical. And this starting stitch will be the same across all rounds. Now I knit 6 stitches in one color. Typically for a thicker yarn I'd be trapping the float in the middle there, but at this gauge I'm not too worried about that. If you like to trap the floats more often, please go ahead and do so. But I am happy with 6 stitches being my maximum float length. And here's probably a good time to talk about color dominance. So we want the contrast color to be popping out more, and if we always pick it up from the bottom, so here I'm at the color change, I could pick it up either over the top of the main color or under the main color. So if we pick it up under and consistently do so, then it will be more dominant than the main color. And respectively, when we need to work with the main color, we could again pick it up under or pick it up over the contrast color, and we just need to remember that the main color needs to go over. So the contrast color goes under, and main color goes over. If you work with 2 yarns in each hand, it's a good idea to have your main color be on the right and your contrast color be on the left, and then you can just throw the main color over the contrast color like so. but this for me is a lot slower, which is why I just keep dropping the strands and picking them up as I need. And I have great tension that's always the same that way. And we can see that the first 6 stitches of the chart repeat, which are all in the first row, all main color, are aligning perfectly with the middle of the top of the foot. And here I have finished the chart. I am 1 stitch away from the end of the round, and you can see that there's exactly, when I work the last stitch in main color, there should be exactly the same amount of, or the same number of main color stitches before contrast color stitches on both sides of the beginning of round, so 3 in my case. Next we will again start with the main color and follow the chart's second row from the starting stitch that's specified for your size, and we will do that every round until we've completed the chart and restart from row 1 again, all the way until we get to the gusset. And a few more color work tips that I think are quite useful is I've just changed to wooden DPNs from metal, and I would suggest that if you are new to Colourwork sock knitting or Colourwork knitting in general, then wooden needles are a lot easier because, especially for small circumferences, because they weigh less, they're lighter. So if you're finished with one, it doesn't pull, the weight and the gravity doesn't pull down your knitting, and it's much easier to manage tension that way. And they're also a little stickier than, these are quite smooth, but still they're not as slippery as the metal ones that I had. So it's much easier for the stitches to grip the needle, and it's not sliding around, so that is another factor that can help manage the tension. And why I'm talking about tension so much is because I've often heard complaints that people make their first pair of Colourwork socks, or second or third, and they just can't get their foot through because their tension is too tight and the sock is too small. So that's why it's important to pay attention and make sure the floats at the back are kept quite loose, not too loose, but quite loose, so that there is enough give when you stretch the sock. And for that reason, whenever you change the color, you can stretch out these stitches on your right hand needle or your active needle that you've just worked, so that when you work with the next color, the float, where is it? The float is already as long and reserved for when you'll be stretching the fabric. And I do it now these days quite instinctively. It's in my muscle memory. Whenever I change color, that's the first thing I do, just stretch the stitches. And here I have, especially if you've worked 2 or more stitches with one color. Now if you work 1, it's probably already, you can't stretch too much, but if you work with a few with more than 1 in a row, then that's a good thing to remember to bake into your knitting steps. And then the fabric is a little stretchier and there's no puckering. I'll just put this in here on a complete sock, because that will be much easier for me to explain where you should start the gusset. And for this construction, we should imagine that the whole foot is divided in 3 sections. So that is the bit from the toe to where you start the gusset, then the bit of the gusset increases, and then the final foot length for approximation is made up of half of the heel flap. So these 3 sections make up the whole foot. And that could be helpful to determine where you should start the gusset. Assuming you know your entire foot length, where you should start the gusset should be that length minus half of the heel flap and minus the rows needed, the rounds needed to complete the gusset increases. So if you know which side you're working and you know your stitch gauge, in the pattern you'll see how many, in the heel flap section you'll see how many stitches you have between the heel flap markers. So taking half of that and converting it to centimeters or inches will give you the distance of this section here. And in the pattern where it states the gusset increases, for each size it tells you it has 8 rounds described for everybody, and then it says to repeat the last 4 rounds a number of times. So you can figure out the number of rounds that the entire gusset increase section is taken and convert that to centimeters or inches. And then when you sum those 2 up, it will give you the remainder of the heel length that you should reserve from the gusset starting point. And you obviously take the full length of the foot and subtract this distance. That should give you the measurement for where you start the gusset. If your row gauge matches, the pattern already has that figured out for you. So if your foot is shorter or longer than the measurement specified for your size in the measurement table, then all you have to do is start the gusset that many centimeters, inches that's specified in the pattern. But if your row gauge does not match, and if it's within 1 row difference, then it's not going to make much of a difference. You can assume that the measurement is correct. But if your row gauge is significantly different, then you might need to do some of this math to make sure that your sock fits perfectly. We'll be inserting the gusset here at the bottom of the sole as a little triangle, and it will be following a striped pattern rather than in this Colourwork chart that we've been doing in the Instep. It will be framed by border in main color, and we'll also be changing the type of increase we use because this area will get a lot more stretch than here at in the toe. So instead of a simple lifted increase, we'll be working it twisted, so to speak, a twisted lifted increase. And in the first round of the gusset, we'll be setting up the markers to help us with the increases. And the first round is slightly different because it's a setup round. We'll be knitting one with main color and doing a right-leaning twisted lifted increase, similar to how the normal lifted increase we're using the stitch from row below that is on the left-hand needle. And this time we do need to place it on the needle temporarily, but at the same time we are ready to knit through the back loop. So whether you use English or continental, this is what it should look like. I'll do that again in English style. Place it on the needle and knit through like so. And we place the first marker. And we continue in the established pattern, starting with the same chart stitch that we did all the rows before, because nothing on this side of the marker has really changed. and we'll do a symmetric operation here on the other side once we get through the chart. And I've gotten to one stitch before the end of the round, and here is where I will place the other marker, and I will start with a twisted left leaning lifted increase. So I'll use the stitch from row below on the right needle, and again I place it on my left needle, and this time I have to knit it through the front loop to get it twisted. I'll do that again. If you placed it in this direction, then you'll need to knit it through the back loop. So it depends on how you put it on the needle. The simplest, of course, is just put it on the needle so that the back leg is first, and it just happens to be mounted in the opposite to what it usually would have been, because we're approaching it from the other side. So in this case, to get it twisted, I need to knit it through the front loop like so. And finally, the last stitch is in main color. So that's been our setup round. And similar to how we did in the toe, we'll do one increase round and one plain round. So the next round, round 2, is simply knitting the stitches between the markers in pattern, meaning the same color that you see on the needle. You'll be knitting without increases, and as soon as you slip the marker, you again follow the established pattern, meaning that you work the next row of the chart all the way to beginning of round. Obviously, when I get here, I'll slip the marker and work these last 2 stitches in main color. What I didn't mention is that here the floats for me just happened to be 8 stitches long, so I had to trap them by simply twisting the yarns. But you could be on a different chart row and might not have any problems with long floats in this section. In round 3 of the gusset increase, we will be doing the increase with the contrast color instead to start the striped pattern of the gusset. So I'll knit one with main color and pick up the contrast color to do the twisted lifted right leaning increase again. So I'm picking up the leg from row below, I'm inserting the needle tip so that my right needle is behind my left needle, and then I can just knit through the back loop with contrast color and knit one with main color. I'll again slip the marker and work in established pattern to the other side. And I've worked the next chart row across to this marker, which I have slipped, and I will do the symmetrical operation I just did at the start of the round, meaning that I'll knit one with main color and increase one in contrast color, doing a twisted left leaning lifted increase. So I will pick up a stitch from row below, like so, and knit through the front loop with the contrast color. And with the last stitch remaining, I will be working that in main color. And that is all for round 3. In round 4, it's a plain round without increases, so we work the stitches on through the gusset as seen. So if it's a main color stitch, we'll work it in main color, and the same goes for the rest of the stitches. They worked in the established pattern. And round 5 is again where we do our increase, and this time we also start setting the pattern for the section that will be repeated a number of times specified in the pattern. So the round 5 is the first of those 4 rounds that will be repeated, and it begins by working a pair of stitches, like a main color and contrast color, to 1 stitch before the marker. In the first time we repeat, and so that is in round 5, we only have that once, but the next time we repeat we'll have 2 pairs of these stitches. So that's why the instruction is written as such, that we knit 1 in main color, knit 1 with contrast color, and these 2 stitches are repeated to 1 stitch before marker, and then we pick up the main color and we do a right leaning twisted lifted increase and knit that last gusset stitch in main color as well. So we get 2 stitches that are in main color next to each other, but that will be rectified in 2 rounds from now when we do the next increase. And as usual, slip the marker and work in the established pattern, which is the next chart row across all the way to the other side. And when I'll get there, I'll show the symmetric operation to do on the other side of the marker. And when you get to the other side, again, we'll work the first stitch always in main color. That's the frame. And also this first increase, which is now a left leaning one, will also be worked in main color. And the remaining stitches to the end of the round should be an even number, and that you repeat as contrast color, main color, and with every repetition of the 4 rows there will be 2 more stitches, so 1 extra pair each time. And round 6 is the second of the repeat section, where we don't do any increases and we work across the gusset stitches as they're seen, but being mindful that for a moment, temporarily, we do have 2 main color stitches next to each other right near the markers here. And round 7 is finally where we rectify the situation, and we'll be inserting that 1 missing contrast color stitch here to have a striped pattern. So we always start with the main color, and we repeat main color, contrast color, main color, contrast color to 2 stitches before the marker. We do that 1 remaining odd stitch in main color, and finally get to increase, doing a right leaning lifted twisted increase in contrast color here, and that last stitch is now in main color, giving us a striped pattern. As usual, we continue here the chart from this marker to all the way to the other end. And to finish off round 7, we do a mirror of what we did at the start of the round. We start with the main color. We now do the missing contrast color stitch by increasing using a left leaning, a lifted increase that is twisted, and we do that 1 odd main color stitch and repeat a contrast color, main color stitch pairs until we run out of stitches here to the end of the round. So those were the we have 1 more round 8 that is just knitting across the gusset stitches as you see them in the same color and working the next row of chart. And then those are the 4 rounds that we repeat until we get the desired stitch count. The pattern also should tell you how many stitches should be between these two markers, which is much easier to count. Now the gusset part is finished and we're ready to add a little half moon shape to shape the heel using Japanese short rows. And we'll do that by working back and forth across these gusset stitches and also at the same time finishing increases. You can use whichever short row method you prefer, but the pattern suggests using a Japanese short rows, which is what I will be demoing here. And the first thing we do is we work to 6 stitches before the marker, the gusset marker, while carrying, and we continue from here on working with the main color. But as we'll have to pick up the contrast color here again to work across the chart later on, we have to get that contrasting strand there, so we'll keep carrying it along by twisting every once in a while after a few stitches, and then leaving hanging over in the other side. So 6 stitches before, that's a couple more. Yeah, and this is where I will do my one of the remaining increases, and it's the similar twisted right leaning lifted increase. I'm knitting one more stitch before securing yarn, as I'm using Japanese short rows and turning a work. Oh, I could catch this strand once more to get it closer to the gusset marker. And after, like so, and after turning, we slip one stitch with the yarn in front. That is mostly because I'm using Japanese short rows. If you're not using Japanese short rows, you can also knit this stitch. And we do the same thing, but this time we're purling. We're purling past, we'll leave the contrast color hanging on this end until we need to pick it up after we've done all the short rows again. And we will purl past the beginning of round, which is the bottom of the foot. All the way to 6 stitches before the marker on the other side. And this is where we will do an increase on the wrong side, a right leaning lifted increase, a purl increase. So we'll have to pick up the strand from the row below, place it on the needle, and purl through the front loop. Again, depending on how you placed it on. Work it so that it ends up twisting without having leaving a hole, and purling one more before again securing the yarn or trapping the yarn with something like a bobby pin or a locking stitch marker, and we slip one and knit along to the other side, this time stopping a little bit before the previous turn, and every time we turn we'll move to just before the previous turn, so that will add this half moon shape. So I'll knit to 4 stitches before my previous turn, again passing the beginning of round, And with Japanese short rows, it's easy to identify where you turned. Just sort of pull on the bobby pin or the locking stitch marker and see that the last 2 stitches that it's attached to, those are the last 2 before the turn. And so that means the turn is here, and if I need to work to 4 stitches before the turn, these will be the first 2 then. So in my case, 3 more stitches to work. And do an increase again, knitting 1 and trapping yarn, and turning work, slipping 1 with yarn in front in this case because we are on the wrong side, purling to 4 stitches before the next marker, the marker on the other side. And again, I can pull, see that it's attached to these 2. I need to stop 4 before the last turn, so a couple more stitches to purl. At which point I do another lifted right leaning increase because it's a purl stitch before, it's easier to pick up the bump from front to back. Place it on the needle and purl through the front loop so that it is twisted. Purl 1 more, trap the yarn, turn work, and repeat the last 2 short rows, so 1 on the right side, 1 on the wrong side, twice more, and we'll end up with 4 locking stitch markers or 4 bobby pins dangling here on the wrong side, at which point we will be ready to work 1 round that gets rid of all these trapped yarns and conceals all the turns. I've completed the short rows. Well, there's 1 more not full row left, but I have my 4 dangling bobby pins on each side, and I am ready to set up for the heel flap by placing new markers that will serve as the heel flap markers, which will indicate where to work from back and forth. At the same time, we'll decrease these stitches here. So first of all, we need to conceal these turns using Japanese short rows. So we knit to the first turn. We'll have to knit all the way to 2 stitches before the the gusset marker, at which point we'll place a new marker here for the heel flap. But to get there, we're knitting across all these turns that we did in the previous rows, and we need to conceal them, otherwise there might be little holes. So once we get to a turning point, we pull up the bobby pin and place this loop onto this left-hand needle. We can remove the bobby pin or leave it in, up to you. Well, of course, eventually you'll remove all of them, but when you do that, doesn't really matter. And we knit 2 together so that the next stitch covers that loop, and that will conceal the turn here. And we do that 3 more times until we've concealed all the turns. Next turn is after 2 more stitches. Again, place a loop on the needle and knit together with the next stitch. And one last time. And here I am ready to place a new marker for the heel flap, at which point I can also quickly trap the contrast color because I'm about to need it to work across the charted section. So I knit a couple more in main color. I remove this gusset marker as I won't need it anymore, and continue in the pattern that I had established across these stitches all the way to the other side of the gusset, and then we'll talk about how to conceal the turns on this side. So I have now arrived at the other side on the marker, the other gusset marker. And it says I can remove the marker and also cut the contrast color because we won't need it for the heel flap. We'll rejoin it when we're done with the heel flap. The rest continues with main color. I am to knit a couple of stitches in main color, and that's where I place the new heel flap marker on this side. And I am to continue to the beginning of round, which is here in the center of the sole, while closing all the turns. So here's my first turn, and when I'm approaching a turn from the other side, I need to stop just one stitch before the turn in order to close it properly. So I'm going to knit a couple more stitches, and then to close this turn, I've stopped one stitch before the turn. I need to knit, slip one knitwise, and then knit through this loop. I could put it on the needle, but that's quite tight there and hard to do. So I perform it just by holding this bobby pin up. And once I've knit through it, I can also remove the bobby pin. And I need to pass that slipped stitch over so that it has a symmetrical appearance as they knit two together on the other side. So this stitch on the side is leaning over that loop. And I'll do that 3 more times. I am stopping just one stitch before the turn, slipping it knitwise, pulling up the bobby pin, knitting through this little loop, and passing the slip stitch over. Again, removing the bobby pin whenever I feel like it. I can also do it all at the very end. Twice more. And to stop one stitch before the turn, slip knitwise. It's important to identify correctly which one to slip, otherwise the turn is not going to be concealed. So make sure you do that carefully. And the last one, slip knitwise, knit through this loop and pass the slip stitch over. The pattern has more in-depth descriptions of all the short row technique that is used with links to demos that you can slow down and re-watch individually. But here we just show it in context of the heel. And we're ready to start the heel flap. As I mentioned, we'll work the heel flap back and forth between these two markers. At the same time, we'll decrease the stitches here on the side, and we'll do that as many times as necessary to decrease all the stitches here. We'll stop just a bit short because the last decrease will be done in the round. So we do that by knitting to the marker, slipping the marker and doing an SSK decrease. Slip knitwise, and knit both of them through the back loop. And that's our right side row. We'll do that every time we're on the right side. And the wrong side is not just a purl stitch, because we want to add some reinforcement. We'll be slipping every other stitch with the yarn in front. So slip the first one with the yarn in front, knit the next one, purl the next one, again slip with yarn in front, purl, slip with yarn in front, purl. And you could do this on the right side, slipping, and then you just simply purl all the stitches, but I prefer to do it on the wrong side, because then I get to purl less. Purling is a little less favored than knitting, so knitting uninterruptedly is easier. That's the logic. And again, slip one, purl one. We're slipping with the yarn in front because we want those little floats that are created as a result to be on the wrong side of the sock. And after we get to the marker, we slip the marker and we do a symmetric decrease on this side, which will be a purl, two together, and we turn work and continue along by slipping the first one, this time with the yarn in back, because we don't need to see it on the right side, and knitting again across all of the heel flap stitches to here. And we do that as many times as is specified in the pattern, and I'll come back and show you how we do the last one and restart the pattern for the leg. I have done my last heel flap decrease, and I have returned to beginning of round, ready to go back and working in the round and beginning the leg section. You'll notice that the final stitch count here is slightly more than when we started the instep, and that's because these are all over Colourwork socks, which can be sometimes harder to get through, to get the heel through. So for that reason, I've added a few more stitches in the leg to accommodate, and we still have to decrease too. And while we set up the last leg round, we'll also do the final decreases. We'll do this one here as established as we're used to, but the one on the other side we'll do from coming from in the round in this direction, and that will doing it that way will prevent a hole forming here. This is also where we re-establish the Colourwork pattern at the back of the leg, and this time, because there are more stitches than there were in instep, the starting stitch of the pattern repeat will be different. So for my size, it's but we still will start the first one, the first and last stitch will be continued in main color like it was here. It's just that now we have a couple more stitches from the chart to work on either side of those. So first one is with main color, and then for me, for size 2, we start with the stitch number 10, and we have to make sure that we pick the chart row that we worked last here and find the next chart row. And I think that for me is chart row 3, but so I have to work a couple of stitches in main color before I rejoin the contrast color, and I'll do my little slip knot method to stabilize the yarn, and I will get rid of that when I've come back to it around 1, and carefully find my main color again. Oops, that's not the right strand. Lucky. And when I get to the marker, I can remove it because I will no longer need it. The heel flap is done. And I do my last decrease as SSK using the strand that would be the next color in the chart. In my case, it's the main color. Oops. It's an alternative SSK. And that's all the decreases completed on this side. And I should, this is where we can check whether we're aligning in the pattern. It seems to be that I have picked the right stitch number and the right row, because I can continue the chart, following the chart seamlessly. I'll follow the chart all the way to 2 stitches before the other marker to do the final decrease. I'm on the other side, 2 stitches before the other heel flap marker, and this time I need to make a knit 2 together to get that decrease line leaning in the correct direction, using the strand, the color that would be the next in the chart. And while I'm hanging out here explaining things, I've stretched out that poor little stitch to way longer than it should be, so I'm gonna try and fix that after the fact by pulling on some of the strands on the wrong side. But for now we can pretend that it's just as long as all the others and continue following the chart to 1 stitch before beginning of round marker, where we will do the final stitch again in main color. And you should find that you have the work is completely symmetrical. We get 3 or however many stitches in main color before contrast color starts on either side of the beginning of round, and that's the case for me here. What I was saying about this stretched out stitch, I'll find the origin of that stitch and slightly pull on these strands to distribute the slack across the row, always leaving a little less until I have no more slack left, and do the same here. And it should look a little better. There's, of course, you can always do a bit more, but in the interest of time, I'll just leave it there. And we're ready to continue in pattern the rest of the leg until we reach the point where we can begin the cuff. I'm at the point of the leg where I'm ready to start the cuff, and that means no more color work, so I can cut the contrast color and continue with just the main color. But before I begin the ribbing pattern, it's a good idea to just knit 1 round in the main color, and that is to prevent these little contrast color stitches from potentially looking not so great. Let's say I was doing a purl stitch here, and I'd have a little contrast color purl bump there, which I'd like to avoid. I'd like a seamless beginning of the cuff, which is why we're knitting just 1 round in the main color before setting up the ribbing pattern. And after completing that one round in main color, I'm ready to start the ribbing pattern for this design. It is meant to be the twisted ribbing, but of course you can substitute with whichever ribbing you'd like, as long as it's stretchy and will help hold the sock in place and not collapse on your leg. So I would start with a knit one through the back loop and purl one all around, and repeat that for as long as you desire the cuff to be. I've now made the cuff long enough to bind off the sock, and because it's a top sock, it's important that the top part really stretches so we can get the heel through. And Tubular Bind-off is one such stretchy bind-off, which is perfect for 1x1 or 1x1 twisted rib. And the reason it's called Tubular Bind-off is because we create a little double knit tube here at the top by working around off double knit and then grafting the two layers together with a Kitchener stitch, and it looks something like that. So we need to first do a couple of setup rounds. In the first setup round we'll be knitting all the knit stitches and slipping the purl stitches with the yarn in front, and on the second round we'll be slipping the stitches that we worked previously and purling the purl stitches. So on the first round I'll knit through the back loop as I was in previous rounds, but when I get to the purl stitch I will slip that with the yarn in front, and I repeat that all the way around. So knit through the back loop, slip with the yarn in front, knit through the back loop, slip with the yarn in front. So that's the first setup round, and that's what's creating the front layer of the double knit border there. And once we're at the beginning of round, we slip the knit stitches with the yarn in back, because we don't want that little float to show up at the front and run across this knit bar here. And we purl one, slip one with the yarn in back, and purl one. And all the slipping happens purl wise because we don't intend to change the orientation of the stitches. And we do that all the way around, and once we get to the beginning of round we'll be ready to bind off the stitches. I've gone around with the second setup round. I'm ready to use a tapestry needle to bind off the stitches, and we need a tail which is roughly 3 times the length of the bind off. I usually create a loop and then to go around once, and then use that to measure it 3 times the length. And I add a little bit extra because I wouldn't want to run out of yarn while doing the tubular bind-off. And because this is a tubular bind-off in the round, we'll do one extra step at the start here, so we can then seamlessly join it in the round. And that is, we'll insert the needle purlwise in the first stitch, that should be the knit stitch, and then find the second stitch and insert the needle knitwise. And then we will start a set of steps that will repeat all around and until all stitches are bind off. So in the first stitch, that is a knit stitch, we will go in knitwise. For a knit stitch in knitwise, slip that off and then go into the third stitch but purlwise, so the opposite of what we did for the first stitch. Now that our first stitch is a purl stitch, we will go in purlwise, slip it off, but in the third one we'll go opposite, so knitwise, and we'll repeat that. Whatever we see on the needle first, that's the direction we go in, and slip that off, so knit is knitwise, but in the third one we go in opposite, so purl, and into the purl stitch we go in purlwise, slip it off, and come out knitwise. We shouldn't pull the yarn too tight here, but it also shouldn't be too loose. The legs that you can see forming across the top here should be as long as the legs of the stitches in the ribbing. If you leave it too loose, you'll get loops that aren't looking tidy, and if you pull too tight, then the whole bind-off will be too tight, it won't look as pretty, and it will also be not as stretchy as it could be. You might not be able to get your heel through that. Once again, in knitwise, out purlwise, in purlwise, and this is a bit tricky to get that needle between the two stitches so that you can come out knitwise. And if you're working on DPNs, then when you get to the last few stitches on one needle, it's a good idea to transfer all of them to be on one needle so that you can continue without any stretchy what's the word I'm looking for? Interruptions. And you do these steps all the way around until you get to the final couple of stitches, and I'll show you what to do then to join it in the round. And just when I'm approaching the end of the round, I wouldn't want the last two stitches to stretch out too much, because then it will be harder to make it look seamless. So I will be picking up with the other side of the needle the first two stitches of the round, like it should be a knit stitch and a purl stitch. That I need to remember I do not need to bind off again, as they are already bound off, but that will be helpful to bind off the last two stitches of the round. And it will also help keep everything nice and tight and from stretching out too much. That will aid in creating as seamless a join as possible. These are the actual last two stitches that I bind off. And once I've done that, I can simply remove the needle and voila. All that's left is to weave in this end and the other ends and block this sock. Well, I hope you enjoyed making your sock. That's it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.